All right, thank you all for joining us. My name is Jason Bosch, and this is If We Were Honest, and I'm really excited today. We've got some really great guests, and I'm so excited and honored to be a part of helping to facilitate this discussion with several people. So give me just 1 second. I want to just double check, and if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with your group. Also, our guests, if for those of the guests that are on here, if you want to share this to your page as well, I'm going to go ahead and share it to the page. It's also on my Facebook page. As well as my YouTube channel. So I'm going to just do this. I'm a one-man band here, so it takes a little bit longer because I'm basically doing everything myself. So let me grab this link and okay, I'm posting it to the page, to the discussion on the page right now. One of these days I'll hire a crew and we'll actually have a full operation going on here. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Jason Bosch, and this program is called If We Were Honest. And today we've got some really great guests, starting with, I'll just go through them one at a time, and I'll put the person on the screen who we have here. We have Cory Morningstar, and this is our friend Cory. Hello, Cory.
Morning.
And Cory is a activist, mother, writer. She writes at The Art of Annihilation. Do you want to tilt your camera down a little bit, Cory? Just slightly down? There we go. Perfect. And she's written a lot about the nonprofit industrial complex, as well as a lot of stuff that's going on right now with the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and a really great voice. We also have Deepti Datt. Hello, Deepti. Let me give DT 1 second, Deepti. Hmm. One moment. Sorry, technical difficulties. The audio is not coming. Oh, there we go. Okay, Deepti, we've got your audio on now. So I will just
Great.
tell.
Hi.
Great. So Deepti, you call yourself a third culture product, Indian, Canadian, American. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you write, direct,
In,
produce
yeah.
music in Indian music and television and film,
Music
correct?
television. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're based out of Goa, India.
Yes. I live in Goa. Yes.
Okay. And it looks like you've done a lot of work in the entertainment industry, and even doing like
Mhm.
acquisitions. And do you want to just tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of some of your background?
Sure. Music television. It's mostly music television that I've worked with and in the music industry for the past 15 or more years. I was part of the setup and launch team for India's first music channel, which was Channel V. Worked with MTV Asia, done the launch of Vogue magazine in India, Vogue India, um, Elite Look of the Year, Ford models. I've been deep and thick in fashion, music, art. That's my background. That's been my background. And I also work with an organization called EMA, which is the Electronic Music Alliance. It's a 501c nonprofit based out of California. I know those are dubious words in this context, as we've all come to learn. But EMA is a music industry coalition, and we try to bring sustainable practices to the electronic music festival industry. That's a summary. That's the kind of work I do, and I write.
Great. Well, thank you. And we also have with us Varun Mather, who's also out of India. He's from New Delhi. He's out in New Delhi. Um, and Varun. Let's bring Varun up. There we go. Let's take. So I'm doing all this myself. So the technical, never mind that my technical things. Oh, there we go. Varun, there you go. Hey Varun, how you doing?
I'm all right. Good morning.
Excellent. So Varun also works in, as a cameraman, field producer, writer, director in documentary. He's done for a lot of different, multiple national and international productions. He's been doing this since 2004. Public Service Broadcast Trust he's worked for. He's done a couple films there on pollution and technology and consumer culture. Do you want to say a few things about yourself, Varun? It's always awkward.
Well, yeah. Well, I've largely been involved in documentary that's enabled me to witness sort of the movement firsthand when I've on ground, and I'm sure opportunities to give some of that everybody else. For a long time, the split between what's happening in forgotten areas of places like India and I've been a rift in how perception is. So that's something that is very much of interest to me. And of course narrative making, because for a long time. So how to create culturalness and things like that of high interest. I think maybe if the space I'd like to about that eventually.
Great. Well, Varun, it sounds like we're getting a little bit of cutting in and out of your thing. So if you have anything in your house that you could maybe open your bandwidth up a little bit, if there's anything running, maybe that'll help. But you're cutting up a little bit there on that. So hopefully that won't be a big problem. But and then last but not least, we have Allison McDowell. Hello, Allison. And Alison, everyone probably knows Alison. She writes for wrenchinthegears.com. She's a mother organizer that started out in looking at what was going on with the public schools, but it kind of led her down a rabbit hole. Alison, do you want to just say a few words a little bit about yourself and what it is you're doing?
As a parent in the education system, and then started looking more broadly into poverty and finance, and was really excited to find and connect with Cory as this all rolled out, because she was so knowledgeable about the financialization of nature. And I felt like, based on my experience in a poor city, a predominantly Black city, Philadelphia, that I had a lot of information about the financialization of humanity and poverty. And so that's sort of the lens that I use, but I'm really excited to have Deepti and Varun on today, because I think something that is missing from a lot of sort of left-leaning aspects of understanding this great reset is the importance of like land-based culture and community and narrative and indigenous world practice and the spiritual aspect. So that's what I'm kind of excited for today, is to have this broader conversation. And in my heart, I feel like the proper response to what's rolling out with this sort of industrially engineered, globalized world is really reflecting back into, people on the land and that spiritual practice. So, so I'm excited for everyone to be here today.
Great. Well, I'm going to bring everyone into a multi-screen here so we can see everybody's face. And so I think maybe we'll start with Deepti. Bring up my notes here. And this is just going to be really informal. And for those of you who are watching, feel free to make, if you have questions that you would like to ask any one of the participants, you can put those in the chat section, and we'll make sure to get those answered. Just 1 second. Just lost my sheet here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So, can we just start with Deep, do you want to give me kind of an introduction about kind of an overview about how this relates, how everything that's going on with the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and how it relates to India? Because I think someone that's watching might be thinking, well, what does India have to do with me? I live in the United States, and it seems like what's going on is a global situation. So, you know, paying attention to what's going on in Australia or in India and other places can actually be very valuable for people living in other countries, as it really is coming from a lot of the same sources. Do you want to just kind of give us a brief introduction about some of the things that have been happening in India as it relates to all this? And we'll just start it off that way, if that sounds okay.
Sure. Sure. Um, well, we were, I don't know how far back I can go, but a lot of the tests for what I've been calling the pharma colonial technocracy, to give it a title, to give what's happening a space and a title. So a lot of it began here. I would say the global South populations, especially India, tend to be kind of testing grounds, if you will. This is where a lot of the things are tried out first before they're kind of rolled out into different areas of the world, especially the global north. So vaccinations, for instance, I think we must all be quite familiar with the Gates Foundation fiasco that left a lot of women compromised here because they were they were told they were getting vaccinations for prevention, but what was actually done is that they were made, they were rendered very ill. I don't want to get into the details of it, but there is a lot of information available for that. And a film that's been censored and banned a lot that does have footage, as well as the kind of litigation that came from the Indian government themselves that had to remove the Gates Foundation from India for what they had done here. And that's been suppressed a lot by media, by mainstream media. You won't find a lot of it unless you go digging. I also feel, to say it diplomatically, let's say I assess we are considered potentially a dismissible population, if you will, a dispensable population, if you will. So something else that was tried here, as you will all be aware, was the biometric data Aadhaar card, the biometric data ID card, which was called Aadhaar here. And again, with Aadhaar, there's been a lot of controversy on the back end of it. The privacy which was promised has been compromised repeatedly, and this is documented. We still don't have clarity on what Aadhaar is and who needs it. And I don't know if you've been following the news out of India lately. The latest thing that they had done, which the government had insisted on being required, which is the Arogya Setu app, which is the contact tracing app, is a whole new controversy around that, because we don't know who actually made it. There doesn't seem to be any lineage for how it came here, who made it, how it got into India. So that's a whole other thing happening on the side. And the most famous of them all, or the most notorious of them all, which is demonetization, which happened. It brought the country to its knees. It was sold and touted as something that was to remove the black market economy, and it was lauded as such in the press by a lot of us as well. It looked like it was for the benefit of the country. Modi's promised that it was going to be, it would remove all the nefarious factors of our economy, etc., the money that doesn't get accounted for. But we know what happened. And then what it was actually for and who was actually involved in it, it goes back to the ID 2020 Alliance. And there's a journalist called Devdan Chowdhury who writes for the Bengal Story, who's done a lot of very good investigative journalism on this, which shows a clear lineage of who actually ran the demonetization project in India. And once again, it goes back to our Mr. Billy Gates to hell. So that's like a overall summary. Sorry, let me finish that. Also, I don't know how I would have missed this, but Kashmir, the lockdown. They've been locked down since August last year, way before all of us were in March. Kashmir has been locked down since August last year. And it's a pretty severe and brutal lockdown that they've been dealing with as well. So yeah, everything that we see happening in the world, I've been saying for a long time, India is kind of like the testing ground. If they can make it work here and launch it here, and then tweak and adjust and correct for whatever's missing or doesn't work, and then roll it out in the global north. We are the biggest democracy. We are supposedly the biggest democracy.
Varun, is there anything you would like to add to that? I mean, you're in New Delhi. You're in a little bit different location, but
I can't hear.
Yeah, Varun, we're not able to hear you. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. My bad. Go ahead. Go ahead, Varun.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Sorry. That's my problem. My mistake. I'm still figuring this out. I'm going to have this thing down so by the end of it.
Okay. So, and I mean, we started in 2019. There was a lot of heat around the ID Citizenship Acts, and the class public was on the stripping. A lot of other people who had with understanding and with a citizenship implemented, and at that time made a deal for facial recognition software that was being already. A lot of us had cameras going shooting people live, and apparently that has been going on for different in New Delhi. Common knowledge, and it was published. So I tend to agree with in the sense that a lot are tried here, but there are a lot of others also which now it's a very, very recent phenomena to implement the financialization of nature that is in the country. And I think we can get into it. Alison and Cory have spoken a little bit more about that, but my angle has always been how the imperialization of the mind. So we've seen factories since liberalization of the government of the economy in 1990, and how habits have been formed slowly, and the distance from where they're coming from. And I think that's an important thing to discuss at length. But continuously, the idea of, in that sense, as an object is continuously framed around indulgence and looking at an agrarian economy. Now, that over the last 25 odd years to a spending indulgence economy.
So Varun, let me ask you. First of all, do you have like a headset or something? You're chopping in and out, and I hear a dog barking. So I don't know if that's playing with it or if it's just a bad connection. I think it might be a little bit of both. But it would be nice to be able to somehow figure out a way to get your audio smoother because you're chopping in and out quite a bit.
Okay, I'll try something to use as a microphone.
Yeah, if you have a headset, and then also if there's anything you can do to, reduce any of the bandwidth that you're using in the house to have it dedicated to this video, that would be great.
Sure.
So, we'll take a look at that, but I want to jump over to Cory, Alison. Would either of you like to chime in on what Varun and Deepti said?
Go ahead, Alison.
Sure. So some of the work that I've been doing lately, because my primary lens is through the educational process, is looking at the ways in which the shift towards smart government, smart cities, and e-government, which is rolling out in India, is linked in with both the healthcare management system, creating a unified health record system. I think is one of the initiatives that is coming out of the lockdown. Also the educational system. And, one of the things that I continue to want to emphasize is that this great reset is the extension of a colonial project and, a Western colonial project of domination. And that's something that Cory speaks to really well in her continuously. But, I just read the last two pieces that she had put out about that. So it's really good to hammer that home. And then it's being pushed out under this idea of benevolence, sort of paternalism, and education. If you can control the education of children, you have a lot of power in a culture. You can erase aspects of cultures that are not aligned to this new world that they're building, this artificial world. So I just wanted to emphasize the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are embedded. The World Economic Forum is working hand in hand with the United Nations, and it's all about impact. This impact data, the datafication of life and social relations. But education is goal number 4, and then there's a specific. I believe it's number 5. That's gender equality. So you'll see in India there is a big push for girls, and in other areas education of girls. And it's not because they actually particularly care about educating girls to be empowered, but it's about harvesting them as data in this larger colonial enterprise, largely to push them into STEM and have them build this artificial world. So that's something that's quite a bit of interest to me, particularly regarding Pierre Omidyar, the Omidyar Network, and entities like Bridges International Academies, that you will put ICT technologies in the hands of the youth and train them up, as Varun was saying, like creating habits and narratives and consumption culture of education versus creation. And it ties in with, I think, what Deepti's going to talk about later with Goya about mining and resource materials that are actually driving the creation of this artificial world that is actually, it's an artificial world, but it's based in destruction of actual real resources and cultural traditions. So, Cory.
I just wanted to clarify, I'm not in Vancouver because can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. My bad. I'll fix that.
Ontario, just it doesn't matter, but I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, so the Sustainable Development Goals, as Alison was saying, have to be understood and recognized as emerging markets. It's under of poverty and health, gender equality, all these things that sound amazing. To get people to yes and support. Obviously everyone wants those things, and so it's all language, and framing is such a huge part of everything that we see happening. So yeah, Sustainable Development Goals are actually emerging markets. So if you look right now, is it number 13, Alison, the health? I forget what number.
I think health is 3. I think health is 3 and education is 4. But there might be another one too. There's like equality of access or gaps or things. So
right. So if you look right now where the money is being invested by investment firms, even pension funds, everywhere else, you'll see number 3 is massive compared to the rest of the goals, because right now that's where you'll see all the attention on vaccines. So right now, everyone's pumping, all the investors are pumping their money into the health goal. And as Alison said, last year in June, the United Nations partnered with the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum, who represents the most powerful corporations across the planet, and they go back 40 years, the annual meetings, they partnered with UN last year, and then this year in March they partnered with the World Health Organization, another division of the United Nations, to create the COVID Business Task Force. So that was launched with over 200 corporate entities the same day that they the panic. So we're witnessing a global consolidation of power. We're witnessing the enclosure of the commons. So what we have is the financial nature happening at the same time as the financialization of human bodies and even social capital. So basically, the markets, with capitalism, everything has to keep expanding, growing. In the global north, there's nowhere left to go. I mean, the markets have reached now that we need to go conquer the global south. And so up here we have, I mean, it's all debt. There's just nowhere else to go. So now we have to create new markets out of what's left. I mean, they've exhausted labor. Now they can replace all the labor. They've stolen all the labor, the theft of the labor. And now they can, basically dispose of the labor and replace everything with automation. So right now, under the pretext of COVID, leveraging the virus, they're able to really push forward what they've been wanting to push, and they just haven't been able to get the traction that they have now. So all these things that before people would have never ever accepted, now through anxiety and fear of what's coming, now it's all going, everything's unfolding really, really quickly. Like what they felt would take place over years and even a whole decade. I mean, now it's happening in a matter of weeks and months. And so this whole idea is like the fourth industrial revolution is the fusion of man and machine, and that it's to basically have people transition from our physical world to an artificial one. So that's what we see happening. Did anyone hear me? Yes? Okay. I can't hear anyone now.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. I'm not
Jason?
very loud, and I'm not.
No, you did good. I don't know where Jason is. Do you want to say some stuff?
I'm here. Deepti, I'm just trying to
you're
see.
here. Okay.
Yep, I'm here. Deepti, I'm not sure if we lost Deepti though, because it seems like the screen.
Deepti looks a little frozen.
Yeah, it froze up. So, I'll work on getting Deepti. Do you guys want to carry on the conversation? I know Alison wanted to talk a little bit about the new health ID system in India, and how that ties into impact investing. Oh, we've got Deepti back. Yay.
Yes, sorry,
Well,
it started pouring and we lost internet like I'd warned might happen. So it literally just started raining and the electricity went. So I'm on my phone connection now. This is what gives me so much hope for India.
Yay!
Because with all these plans and everything going on, like at the drop of the hat, there's no internet and you're not connected. And they talk about penetration and all of this stuff, but the bloody electricity goes off. That's it. You're back in the village, in the last century. So this is what actually gives me a lot of hope for India. So this may keep happening. Sorry, whoever I interrupted.
No, it's great.
I thought a lot about that too. Go ahead, Alison.
No, this is good.
No, I was just saying I thought a lot about that too. With as this moves forward, I think that those of us who speak out are actually going to be removed from the technology. We're not going to be allowed to use the technology, and thinking forward about like, okay, how do we, I mean, it'd be good if everybody were removed from the tech. I mean, I love technology, but just seeing the direction that it's going and thinking about like going back to living life that's not so technologically dependent is interesting to think about. But I think some of us will be forced into that.
Deepti, do you think you could speak a little bit to what we were talking about before the call about the citizens' resistance of what's going on in
Oh
Goa
yeah,
now?
yeah. So I'm in Goa, which is on the west coast of India. It's the littlest state, smallest state in India. This is where I live. It's home. It's the smallest state. It's one of the greenest. It's a holiday destination because of the way that nature has been preserved and respected and cared for. The kind of lives that people in Goa lead, where there's a lot of respect for the nature and a history and a tradition around it. A lot of old sanctuaries around here. So what has been happening, and this is recently I've come upon the depth of what's going on. I've only known about it spuriously until very recently. There's a citizens movement here that's called My Molem. And Molem is a region in the east part of Goa, which is, it's actually one of the most biodiverse regions. It's known as a biodiverse hotspot. I think it's like third or fourth behind the Amazon, and nowhere near as large. And you may know of the EIA law, the environmental laws that India has been trying to change. There's been a lot of protest around it. Well, the way then it comes down to how it plays out is during the lockdowns, there were 3 large projects given the go-ahead. So without public recourse, without any discourse, without permissions, nobody knew that it happened. And they were given permission to go right through this biodiverse region. And this region is called My Molem. And what it's resulted in, so the 3 projects that got the go-ahead were a railroad, a highway, and an energy project, bringing energy into Goa. So some of the questions you have to, and they say that these are public works, public improvement projects. When there are projects like this that are put together, the government's prefers that what they're doing is improving. It's a public works project. It's called a public improvement project. So, the citizens in Goa has the highest per capita income of anywhere in India. The state, it has the highest per capita education. So it's a savvy population. The middle class of Goa is a savvy population. They're aware that they believe in democracy. Goa also has it's the only state with what's called a universal law, which is like the rest of India, the inheritance is through the eldest male in the family. In Goa, it's equally, it's a male or female in the family. It's equally done. So the laws in Goa are also progressive compared to the rest of India. So it's the people who took up this cause, questioning how these large-scale projects were given the go-ahead in Goa while we were all in lockdown. It's the people who got together. It's the people who have filed a PIL, which is a public interest litigation. It's the people who are protecting this biodiverse region, and it's a protected forest. As I was saying earlier, India actually has really strong environmental laws. Like everywhere else, it's about the implementation. It's about the execution and enforcement of those laws where the question comes in. So interestingly, one of these, the Power Project, this people's movement, gone after specifically the Power Project, questioning why this input of power? Why is it important to cut through this forest, this ancient forest, Maimolem area, this protected forest? What is it that we need all this power in Goa for? No one knows. So that's not been forthcoming. We don't know, why are we getting expanded highways? Why are we getting expanded railroads? Why are we getting all this power? What is it for? What is going to be happening in Goa that we need all this for? And we've not got answers for that. The people's movement that's called the Maimolem movement have not got answers for that. So it's an ongoing fight. And it's interesting, in the past couple of days, as I was saying, researching this leading up to this talk, I also found out that driving the transmission, the power project of the three, the one that's bringing in the power, through a series of shell companies, leads back to what in India we say our old friend Vedanta, because they've been around before. Vedanta, even though the name is Indian, it's a British company based in London. They deal with resources. They're called Vedanta Resources. And they had already got into a lot of trouble in Odisha, where they had displaced the Niyangiri tribals for bauxite mining. And they've been in Tamil Nadu as well. This is Vedanta through their local subsidiary called Starlight. And so they've been in Tamil Nadu as well, where in Tamil Nadu they call what they did a massacre, because the indigenous people came up, they had set up a copper mine there, which had already polluted the waters, the lands, and they were continuing with this. The people in the region where this copper factory was set up, copper processing factory was set up, revolted and came up against them to stop them. And there were 13 people that were murdered, killed for it. And via police forces and the local goons that they used. So they've been smart in that they've come into Goa with police protection in place already. So they've obviously, like I said, they learn, they break the laws, they find the loopholes, they subvert, they invert, they undercut, and they make it in there. Even as there are public interest litigations in court, even when the Supreme Court has, given a stay order, they tend to find it easier to keep doing their work and fighting the case in court. So this is kind of what we see in India. They will continue the work, they'll continue chopping down the forest, they'll continue building, they'll continue doing what they need to do while fighting the case in court, even though there may be a stay order with it. And then it gets down to things like, on the ground, who are you going to meet? You have your police protection, are you going to go up against the villagers? So it's very inspiring for me, this specific movement called Maimolem, because it is very much a citizens movement. It's the people of Goa. There's no leader. They don't take funding. They do no fundraising. They don't accept any finance. And it's really heartening, because that's what keeps it pure. It is very much a people's movement to protect their forests and their resources. And I wanted to say this. A couple of days ago, one of the ladies that I was speaking to from this movement, there is order and system to it. There are just no leaders, and they have no finance. So one of the ladies I was speaking to, who's running the art aspect of this whole movement, I asked her. I said, do Goans object to the fact that it's someone from the outside coming in and doing what would be considered as development, right? It's proposed as improving the lives of the people to betterment. The government itself is proposing it as a public benefit project. So is it that Goans find it problematic because it's someone from the outside coming in and doing it, a company from the outside, or and you would like to keep it for yourself? Or is it that you have a problem with the plan itself, that they're bringing in these 3 huge public works projects through one of the most biodiverse hotspots on the planet that happens to be in Goa? And the answer she gave me was so interesting, and it kind of forms the crux of everything for me. It was enlightening for me also, because she said, well, that's a very Western way of thinking and a very Western way to ask a question, because we don't think like that. It's, we're not putting a usage value or a usury value on the resources, on our natural resources. It's not about what we can use them for or what value they have. It's there, it's ours, and there's an identity we have as Goans, a vision and an identity as Goans, which says that, even if it was that as a child you went there for a picnic, it's worth saving. So it's a whole other angle of approach, looking at how engaged we are with the lands and the soils and the resources. It's funny that nature now starts, everything that we discuss about nature now has that word resource plugged in with it. And I don't know if we need that. I don't know if we need those two things to be put together. Natural resources. I mean, is it a resource? No, it's not. It just is. It's nature. It's here. It's the lands. It's the soil. It's the trees. It's the food we grow. Is it a resource? So, yeah, that's about my model. And thank you for giving me the time to speak about that, because I felt it was really important, because it's very visceral. It's very visceral. It's very much here. It's happening on a daily basis. So, yeah. Oh, I can't hear you. I lost you, Jason.
I'm back. There we go. I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times we get caught up in talking about like the rules that we go by, but we don't talk about the underlying ideologies and belief systems that drive those rules, and just the idea of viewing the world through the lens of commodities and resources and capital. I mean, just the idea of the term human capital is we take it for granted as just being a thing, but if you dig a little bit deep into it, it's actually kind of a perverse idea, really. You thoughts on that, you guys?
I want to hear what Varun has to say. Okay.
Yeah, you guys? Anyone want to chime in?
Oh.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone's speaking. Should I speak to that?
Yeah,
I can't hear anyone else.
I'm curious if Varun's voice over is better. Like, I'm curious about that, Varun's perspective on that.
Varun, do you want to give it a shot here? Hopefully we've got...
I hope this works now.
Oh man, it's such a bummer.
Shit.
We really want to hear you, Varun.
Is it cutting out all the time?
It's just choppy is all.
Yeah.
Okay, so should I give it a shot? Because I don't have a microphone.
Okay, I'm just trying to think. I'm wondering, there might be another way I can patch you in via like a phone or something. Let me maybe there's a way I can get your audio in here. I guess it's pretty expensive to call. Let me look up an option, because if there's a way, like if you could call, it would be pretty expensive to call me, but I'm wondering, there's probably another. Give me just a minute. Does somebody else want to chime in real quick while I figure out a way to patch in a different audio for Varun?
There's a documentary right now that WWF has put out, and WWF works in partnership with World Economic Forum, Al Gore's the Climate Reality, what's it called? Climate Reality Project. All these NGOs that lead the plan financialized nature, and basically everyone should watch this film to give you some insight, perspective into sort of the depraved mindset and ideology behind how they view nature through this capitalist mindset. Through this, it's really quite disturbing. Just sort of picking up on what Deepti was speaking to. These are living biological communities. I mean, they're reframed as asset. The biodiversity crisis is reframed as an asset management problem. They're living biological communities that exist for their own purposes, not for human purposes, just for their own purposes. And I think it's been really quite easy. I'm always sort of and disturbed by the fact that people aren't more bothered with the whole idea of payments for ecosystem services. I mean, the whole objectification of nature is very patriarchal. And I'm surprised at how people don't seem very bothered by it. And I think that's simply because we've become so detached from nature. When you're not, when you can turn on your tap and get water, when you buy your food off the shelf in a grocery store, when you get the materials for your shelter from the Home Depot, you become, generation after generation, you become more and more detached from nature. And that's what technology has helped achieve as well, for those who want to take us down the Great Reset route. So yeah, that's a huge problem. I mean, our detachment from nature already, I mean, that makes it so much easier. Bring the Great Reset, it's just one more step away. It's sort of like taking whatever connection in the West remains to nature and just basically chopping that off, right? Within that, it's like basically ending that, and then you are able to shift the population from the what remains of the physical world and the natural world right over to an artificial one. So I just wanted to add that about the framing and the language around nature as assets and human capital, social capital, all these things. The language is really, really important.
Real quick, Varun, I'm going to try something. I'm going to create a whole new link for you, and I'll email it to you. I'm going to try to
Okay.
lower bandwidth and see if that helps. So I'm going to get rid of you off this call and check your email. I'll send you a brand new link.
Could I say something about One Health at this point, briefly?
Yeah, go for it.
Is that all right? So I think it's really important to understand, I mean, both what Cory was saying about, ecosystem services and asset management of nature, and what Deepti was saying about while both having strong environmental laws, but that the corporations are able to sort of get in and under and around, and with the force of military, just carry out their own agenda, much of which is, extraction tied to creating artificial worlds out of the real world. Is that a narrative, and Varun is so good on that. That's why I'm interested in hearing what he has to say. That the narrative that is being shaped now under the pandemic, this COVID reset, is that essentially the World Bank has a program called the One Health Initiative. And the framing is such that negative impacts on the environment and pushing humans in proximity to certain, animal species creates zoonotic disease transfer, right? That there's illnesses transferred in inappropriate relationships between humans and the environmental systems. And so that is essentially, if you look at a Venn diagram of managing the financialization of the environment and the financialization of humanity, like human bodies, it's that in-between point at which One Health sits. So the World Bank would like to finance sort of structural adjustment protocols to engineer the environment, to keep people out of the environment, and to keep, the environment away from people, to break down those relationships, as if individual, land-based communities that have long-standing authentic relations with how they use how they are in relationship to the lands that they have been on for centuries are the same as a corporation coming in under police protection and clearing things for a railroad cut or a mining operation. They're going to frame the environmental movement such that it would keep people who have a very real right to access their way of life, living in community with animal and plant relatives on land, to keep them away under the cause of pandemic preparedness or possible disease. And that I think it's really important to understand that within a financial construct, that is going to be what is going to come out of COVID, that it was never ever going to be just about one episode of a public health incident. It really is about a biosecurity state in which zoology is positioned against like human health, human public health. And that is very intentional and going to be used to justify removal of people who would actually be the caretakers, the citizens, to stand up for the land, to remove them out of the equation so that the corporate interests can come in, and just have their way with it, and to attempt to disempower the people who have actual authentic, have authentic connection to those lands. So I just think that's really important to think about moving ahead, because it really is all about understanding financial markets and power.
Great. And I'm still, we're waiting for Varun to come back. I sent him a new link. So hopefully he gets that with a lower audio. For those of you who are watching or saying just turn off the video, we're using a different platform. We're using, it's called vMix and vMix Call, and it doesn't have all the same features. We're just like turning on and off the video. Looks like we have Varun back. And by the way, the reason why I'm doing this is because Zoom, as we all know, is one of these big, huge tech companies that's dominating the entire world of communication, really. It's kind of disturbing. I guess you guys might want to see my face while I'm talking, but the power of Zoom is enormous. I read, there's an article I just posted the other day that they're more profitable and they're bigger than Exxon now, and they've also been censoring people. So I'm trying to use a different platform than Zoom, and there's a few extra problems that I'm working through some kinks on, but bear with me, and I'm really grateful for your patience and everyone for joining us. Let me I'm going to jump to Varun real quick and see if we can hear you. Hi, Varun.
Hi, can you hear me properly now?
Ah, we can hear you. It's
Okay.
not breaking up. So
All right.
yeah, the video quality is a little bit lower, but we can hear you, and that's the most important thing. So you were saying before, do you want to just kind of jump back in from where you were at before? And
Yeah. See, I had to reframe the whole idea of looking at the condition that it takes to stop violence and destruction. So so that's where that takeoff point about 10 years ago, and I started this. But as I was mentioning, it was the conquering of the global south, and in the sense of the imperial project as it moves deeper and deeper into. That's been a story that has been playing in India since liberalization, but it has not had the mettle and the speed with which we see it now. And I wanted to reframe the entire around the idea that because we are always continuously told that the world is fragmented and it needs to be united, or that the platforms like Facebook are us do that, or that the unity of the human population and its interactions with its habitat, which is the planet, care of by an external body, which is either the United Nations or government policy or things like this. And my problem always has been that there is a continuous externalization of authority, of the individual authority, and that whether it has been historically, it has been religion, which then, especially too, it kind of gets transferred into governance models, and then now we understand now that actually technological and industrial policy has always been guiding this. What does it, how does it stop? How does the violence and the destruction of nature stop, actually? And what does the individual have to do with it as an individual? Lesson, Jason, is that the context of people who are living in Australia are very different from people who are living in Canada or India. So these kind of cultural formations that have happened in our lifetimes have managed to keep us isolated in a very set paradigm of what means. And as an object, the city itself is just a continuously consuming resource from chlorine, like Cory was pointing out, that you can just drive to a superstore of some sort and buy whatever you need, but you don't ever have to step into the farm from where all of this is coming from. So the infiltration of technology and industry, personal human relationships, has been so severe that we don't understand there are millions of people who are present in our houses. You know, like every single thing that we own and that we use, there is a process of mining, then there's a process of assembly and transport and retail, and there's just every single thing I have, or all of us have, dependent on the world. So in that sense, the world is already united. But that process of unity itself has been imperialized by the industrialist and by the technocracy. And being used, it's not being used, that idea itself is not being used in favor of the public, but more in favor of power and taking control of all our lives. You know, like we go through really very strong, especially, I can talk in context of India, but I think all of us, when we go in educational institutions, we end up unknowingly being competitive with our closest friends, because we're waiting for marks and grades, right? And then eventually that kind of fractalizes itself into university, which is what we then see in capitalist economics, like that competition's the only way of looking at how the world functions. Which, if we had to kind of if we had to rephrase that, if we had to change the idea of competition into the idea of collaboration between individuals, then we all would have to know how to build a house, or how to, and what it means to live with the earth, you know, and we don't have that knowledge. That's a measure that has been very, very, it's a concerted effort to erase that knowledge in publicness at large, and that has been replaced with the idea of ease and leisure, right? And that you can go and work in a multinational company, which is essentially somebody else's dream to make billions of dollars, and they're going to hire an army of people who are going to do very different kinds of work. The education system provides those people, and then as job workers and job seekers, our methodology becomes that we go for 40 hours a week into this office and we have a public face, and then on the weekend we take that public face off, and we then go and indulge ourselves in the market space. And it's this inculcating of this habit that has essentially distanced us from each other, you know, like, and it's getting worse now. I mean, look at what's happened in the lockdowns. 6 months, 8 months, people have not seen each other. You know, like people are finding it difficult to readjust meeting each other now. So that kind of a psychological break is it's present. It has always been present, and I think now, unless we realize how deeply connected we are in everything in the world as individuals, it's going to be very difficult to turn this around.
Thank you, Varun. That was you're still breaking up just slightly, but not quite as bad. But you know, the one option is I'd create a new call and just have like a still image of you, if we want to do that.
Yeah.
But we were able to. How did it sound for you guys?
I think it was pretty good.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can understand what you were saying, which was helpful. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I would just say that Klaus Schwab, even in his book that he just published, I think July, what's it called, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, written by Klaus Schwab, and I forget the co-author, Terry, doesn't matter. Anyway, he actually goes on to state how the psychological impacts of COVID-19, of the pandemic, of actually the lockdown, are assisting and accelerating the goals of the Great Reset. And so it's they're really pleased. And actually, he goes on to state how the psychological impacts of the lockdown will continue into the future and really change things forever. For instance, he even says things, I mean, these are really disturbing things. He's future people may not, okay, right now you might go, who can't enjoy picking up a piece of fruit, your senses come alive, the smell, the color, everything. Well, according to Schwab and, like I said, his depraved ideologies, in the future you might not ever touch that, right? It's like just like if you go back and you read the scenario planning report from 2010 by the Rockefeller Foundation, little girl, I forget what her name is, they give in each section, they assign a character to the name. I think her name is, I don't know. So she sees the water and it's clear and beautiful, and she wants to put her toe into the water. And then, according to the scenario, the story, she stops herself and she doesn't put her toe in because it's illegal now, and she would never want to contaminate the water. And so there's this divide. People are no longer a partner, they're a threat to nature and each other, right? And even now, the whole idea that physical is dangerous, digital is safe, right? Stay home, stay safe. So it's like this alienation from each other and this fear of one another. Contaminated disease, sickness, like this fear that's being pounded into our psyches is enabling the whole Great Reset to come into play. I mean, it's so frightening and so deliberate and so calculated and so brilliant on their part.
So,
So
I did.
go ahead,
Sorry.
Deepti.
I just wanted to ask about the lockdown last August in India, under what pretext, because I didn't know that, and I wanted to also ask, a question.
So Kashmir has always been, since independence, Kashmir as a state, Jammu and Kashmir, J&K, they didn't, they weren't ratified as part of of India. And what happened in August last year, I believe, was a test of what was going to be done in March. I don't have proof of that, but like I said, I think everything gets done here as a test run, as a trial run. We're a trial balloon, democratic society, educated, urban. So they do the trial runs here before they roll it out elsewhere. And Kashmir was, in essence, annexed. There's a proposition, I don't know what proposition number that is. Maybe Varun may know that better than me, but essentially what happened is they were annexed, and to assure that there wouldn't be, as there always has been in Kashmir, a separatist movement, because the people themselves don't ally to India or Pakistan, and India and Pakistan have always been at heads with it. Kashmir is, well, I mean, the British left us divide and conquer, right? So they left an area that would always be insurgent. There would never be peace in that area. So, and there's a lot of controversy around this. I don't want to be controversial. I'm saying what I know about it. But in August last year, Kashmir was essentially annexed and was put under lockdown. There were no journalists allowed in there. There were no observers allowed in there from any international body either. And it's been like that since August. So way before us in March, and now through the time now, they have been in lockdown. Kashmir has been in lockdown. If that answers your question.
Well, no, go ahead, Jason. Go ahead, really.
I can't hear you, Jason.
My bad. I've been muting my microphone, just trying to, I'm working on this. I'm curious. Well, I had a couple questions, but one of the things was just to reiterate, that this really is important to understand what's happening in India, and I think we think of nation states as historically we think of nation states as being these sovereign entities or whatever, and it seems to me more often that they're really just they're there to administer programs that are not that don't derive from within the state itself. And does anybody want to talk about that? Because it seems to me like the idea of a nation state, we're always talking about, oh, this country versus that country, and it seems to me like that's kind of a something that's really for the people, like the nationalism and stuff is something for the people to digest. But as far as the people who really have all the power in the world, it seems to me like the nation states are almost like they're secondary at best. Did anyone want to?
Well, I mean, if you look, I was talking incidentally with somebody last night about this, is that identity in that sense is a very interesting subject given the context that we're talking about, because we are, I mean, in the sense like we have this mask that is inculcated from a very young age, was the static personality. And I mean, it becomes a fractal of what this then becomes the tribal identity or the family identity, and then so on and so forth. And then you have suddenly this manifesting a national identity. But it does not account for the fact that every new experience of the living thing that we are is continuously forming what we think we are. So to fall back into a very kind of fructified idea of I am, then forces other people to do the same, because that is the only way then that we can interact. And then it kind of becomes this, we can continuously to hold on to that identity, and that doesn't allow for change, because the change then is that before is that that is the truest thing that you can do in life on the planet, is that everything is always changing. But as a population, we don't command that change. We are forced into identity politics of these kinds, where we are then looking in some ways for subconscious validation and ownership and of this kind of mind that we society, which I mean it leads to a lot of other problems. But what I'm saying is that if we don't allow for change and somebody else is always managing the change in society, then we get what now, like we don't own the change. We are being forced to change in a lot of ways.
No sound.
Can't hear you.
I keep forgetting. Why? I'm sipping my coffee and I didn't want people to hear slurping. One of the words that comes to mind a lot for me is the term agency, actually having human beings operating on their own agency, and it seems like we give up our agency to the corporation that we work for or our government or these different identities that we latch onto. And those things are obviously useful and have a function, but I think that the idea that if we can get to a world where people are conscious and that are critical and acting on their own agency, we might be able to get somewhere.
I think what think what Deepti was saying just about when she was describing that movement, that was completely independent, no leadership, no funding behind it. That's what we need to do here, because right now in the West, at least, all of our quote unquote movements are actually financed by the very people who are initiating this whole great reset. And so we don't have actually, well, there are small resistance movements and indigenous resistance that we don't hear about very much, but we have to take back the power. I mean, this is really, this is class war. And if we don't stop this, the solutions for what we're facing will never be found in the system that has created them. And they will never, those that have destroyed the planet will now are not going to be the ones that now regenerate it and protect it. It's just like that's not going to happen within the imperialist, patriarchal, capitalist system. And so we have to, we have to really open our eyes up and stop. It's like a willful blindness that we won't see this. I mean, and maybe, yeah, it's frightening because no one's going to save us but ourselves. And if we don't, they will kill every last living thing on this earth. I mean, they're already looking at mining the oceans because there's not enough on the train there's not enough minerals and rare earth metals to even create this great reset. And so they've already started. They plan to mine the oceans. I mean, there's nothing that it's all under the pretext of protecting biodiversity and climate change. What they have in store will worsen everything. Climate change will get worse. Biodiversity, ecosystems will continue to collapse. So we really have to find ways to seize back our power.
Nope, can't hear you, Jason.
Keep forgetting. Sorry. Alison came up with the phrase of the profane versus the sacred, which is the title of this talk. And I would love to get Alison's. Do you want to talk, because that kind of feeds into what was just said, a little bit more about that idea of the profane versus the sacred?
Well, I think all of those of us who can see the bigger picture of what's happening, we feel like that it is sort of, we're at this crescendo of this struggle for domination, and, forces for good and forces, for evil, I guess. And that there's this sort of larger struggle that's playing out. So on the one hand, I think there's, I very much agree with Cory's take and Deepti's about like horizontal, decentralized, autonomous entities that are not taking money, that are not part of the system, that need to be part of the resistance. But then I also, and I also agree with what Varun was saying, is that we all need probably a lot of internal work to get to that point that we can act with agency. And everything that's being stacked up right now, especially with regards to the education system and online education, is about either further fragmenting people in their consciousness and their identity and putting them into feedback loops and using those as data streams for global export profit. We're used to looking at structural adjustment about commodity exports, right, and agricultural commodities, but really data commodities are the next thing, in education and healthcare are key pieces of that. And pushing people through technologies and wearable technologies into these behavior loops and feedback loops is really, in ways that are almost unimaginable at this point, going to control how we even see ourselves unless you have a really strong will. And so that's, I think, one of the things that, a number of us, when I was first starting this, it was like, a lot of moms, who are standing up against this really anti-life agenda, both for humanity and for nature. And and Deepti was really lovely in sharing lots of information, like the sacred feminine. And then there are all of these sort of larger movements about, the earth and Mother Earth and the spiritual aspect that's connected to that. Because I think to stand up against DARPA, to stand up against Goldman Sachs, it takes, you have to have a pretty, you have to have a reserve of internal strength and fortitude that I think in many respects comes with our relationship with larger systems, energy systems, faith systems. And so that's what really hit me, is that I'm also looking a lot at sort of the history of the deep state and MK Ultra and these ways in which people are using psychological operations to manage both individuals and populations, and understanding that many of those individuals, who were actually in Nazi Germany in those early experiments, were looking to like transcendental meditation and ways of accessing different consciousnesses and then weaponizing that against humanity. So like for me, that's where it comes from, is that, I don't know that we're going to, we're never going to have Bloomberg's millions or, the satellites of Elon Musk. It's going to have to be something else that we come at this machine. I think I call it like a mechanistic spirit eating machine with. And I think that comes out of a place of love and deep caring and connection. But we're really going to have to commit ourselves to mending those connections, because they've been totally severed and devastated in very intentional ways with the lockdown. And, I hope we can get there. I really do. So.
And you guys feel free to chime in any time you want. For those of who are watching on either Facebook or YouTube, I know there's a lot of comments. There's a lot of conversations that are happening in the chat. But if you do have questions for any of the speakers, feel free to put them in there. Maybe start it with the word question. That way I can know that this is a question for someone, and I will definitely share that with everyone. This whole thing started because I've been following the work of Alison and Cory as well, and I really wanted to just have a conversation between the two of them. And I thought, wow, that would just they both have different pieces of the puzzle, and I'm really excited that Alison suggested bringing Deepti and Varun into this, and specifically what's going on in India. But excuse me. It's not Corona, I promise. I guess I can't promise, but so I think there's different people have different pieces of this puzzle that we're all trying to piece together and figure it out. And I think that Alison and Cory, you guys are doing a lot. There's a piece of it that I think that there's not enough work being done on it, which is the financialization piece, the debt instruments, as well as particularly the new monetary systems that are going to be on blockchain that they're going to be rolling in. And I know that in India, I haven't read too deeply into this, but they did an elimination of cash. Or would Varun or Deepti, would either of you want to just kind of say something about that part of it, that the whole getting rid of cash and getting everybody onto a digitized monetary system? If you have something to say about that, if not, that's okay too.
That can be a Varun call. I'm sure he knows more around that.
Well,
and maybe anything about Libra and Facebook.
Well, so India has been always an informal economy. It's worked on cash money a lot, right? And the debit and the credit cards are largely used, I would imagine, in metropolitan areas, especially in bigger cities, and maybe tier 2 cities. Most of the business was being done. I'm still using cash a lot, but then the push for Google Pay, for example, or Paytm, which is run now by an Indian guy, which essentially stores your money on an e-wallet that then you can use, so you don't have to use cash anymore. And you have these kind of barcodes all over the city in every single store that you can just scan and pay. And so the habit has already formed, and a lot of people are very used to not dealing anymore in cash money. So, and I've been, there have been a lot of conversations with some local vendors near where I live about who controls the money. In a sense, right now we can say that we control it, but ultimately I think it's our habits that control the money, right? It's what are we going to do with that money, whether it's on tokens, and right now if it's cash in my wallet, what am I spending it on, versus if it's stock blockchain or a cryptocurrency system, then what am I buying? So for me, the idea is right now that every single object that is available in the store, I can go and buy for cash. Eventually, if all of this great is true, I'm going to be using tokens that I earn on a digital platform by doing some task or the other, so that I can buy the same objects. So in essence, I think the forced push is towards gaining more control of our spending habits over in that sense, right? Like, and then you're not going to be able to exit from that once all your especially food, if that's on a blockchain that's in control of someone else, and you don't have any cash where you can go and pay someone because it's useless, then like, that's my thought. And it worked, like when the demonetization happened, it worked. People were really convinced that the government took a really good decision for the most part. They stood in lines for hours to get, you were limited to 10,000 rupees withdrawals, and they were saying that we cannot give you any more money. And people were okay with this, and it really wrecked a lot of lives. But experiment of how it's going to get implemented worked, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Alison.
Can I say? I just want to say one of the articles that I was looking at early on, and Cory mentioned it in her most recent piece, was Facebook's, is it internet.org, was sort of like their stripped down internet access for global South markets, which eventually saw a lot, this was about 5 years ago, a lot of pushback in India around net neutrality. And surprisingly, there were people who were realizing that Facebook's market was that they needed additional youth to grow their digital markets, and they were pretty much maxed out in the global north, which is why India and Africa were attractive markets for them, because they were younger populations. But they weren't going to give them full internet access. It was just going to be mediated through what Facebook could decide. And now that I understand better about the digital central bank digital currencies that are coming in and how Libra fits into that, if you consider that eventually your e-wallet with your tokenized rights and privileges is linked to your payment system, and and what Varun was saying about accessing food, who knows what that task is. It essentially all becomes script that can be managed, Jason, with what you had mentioned, like not even necessarily within the country of which you're a citizen. In the cloud-based world, your life could be largely dictated by forces well beyond any national borders if your ability to live and survive is dependent on digital rights or a digital currency that's in a wallet that you have no control over, or say your community has no say or control over. It's tense actually to think about it, especially when you talk about like controlling food. I know a number of things that have come up in conversations about Bill Gates, which I would just say, like I often say, use caution. They were like, oh, if Bill Gates really cared, he would feed people, right? He wouldn't be doing vaccines. He would actually be solving world hunger. And what I'm saying is, you don't want Bill Gates's hands in your food systems. Clearly with the GMOs, but even more so in terms of industrial warehouse food production that would be framed as health improvements. And then the other piece of this for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I'm not sure if it's a separate goal or if it's woven into many of them, is this idea of finclusion, like financial inclusion. And early on when I was starting to study blockchain, there were Richard Branson owns a private island in the Caribbean, Necker Island, and he would invite all the blockchain folks to come and sort of plot this out. And essentially their goal was to, connect all of the people who are outside the capitalist system in informal economies into digital capitalism. That was very clearly in the intent. And I think that the demonetization and the push for Aadhaar and digital identity is hugely a part of that. And then if you have inclusion and you're monitoring that people are using the correct financial behaviors, right? The correct savings behaviors, the correct purchase behaviors. You can just engineer all of that on in these digital systems, and it's just breathtaking. And the fact that at this point there are so few media outlets that are really digging into the wider implications of this. I mean, a lot of alternative press, but it doesn't have nearly the traction that it should have.
So it's interesting. Can I say something about what you said earlier, Alison, when you were saying there's nobody coming to help us or save us? Is that what we've got to do is the work on ourselves, right? And I just read Cory's latest work, The Social Dilemma piece that you had shared with us. I too came into blockchain primarily from first knowing about cryptocurrency. And then, of course, there's been this acceleration being exposed to your work and Cory's work in my understanding of what's actually going on. Yet and still, demonetization, the Aadhaar biometric identity, the lockdowns, everything that we're dealing with, a known set of principles that have to do with urbanization. So there's another factor that comes into play with India specifically, and I'm really curious to know what you all think of it as well. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but in 2001 there was, or 2002, I think it was 2001, there was, if you may have heard about it, a festival we have called the Kumbh Mela. It comes around every 4 years, every 8 years, every 12 years, and every 144 years. So in 2001, it's called the Mahakumbh Mela, which was the 144-year gathering. And believe it or not, so the gathering is of yogis, the original indigenous, lineages of yogis here in India, our spiritual lineage. And at the 144-year gathering, which was in 2001 or 2, there are yogis who only come down for the Mahakumbh Mela. So the proposal is that they've been around for 144 years. This is part of the legends of India. From that time on, Harvard began doing a study of the Kumbh Melas. The 4-year, the 8-year, the 12-year, which happens in 3 different areas at the confluence of the Ganga and the Yamuna River. Harvard has been studying from every angle of approach. So from architecture, from sociology, from psychology, from belief systems, from organizational systems, because the Kumbh Mela that one was approximately, the last one I've actually been to is, I think the statistics are something like 30 million people come across 10 days to the confluence of the river during the Mela, during this festival, on faith, on the principle of belief and faith, on spirituality, which I always argue is our highest legacy here in India. I mean, that's considered a bit regressive and backward now in the urban progressive elite liberal India that is kind of taking the lead. But my argument is always our spiritual legacy is what is most important and valuable about what and who India and Indians can for the human community, for the entire human community. So when you guys, you Cory and Alison, speak about blockchain, about what's happening and how we're being commodified, right, nature and humanity to be put on this system, which is a layer upon reality, I have to fall back into India and to say, as I've kept saying, it's not a foregone conclusion. It's not a foregone conclusion. They're not going to be able to do this. It's what's happening here is the attempt to play creatrix. But the very word artificial reality right? Artificial intelligence, sorry, AI, artificial intelligence, right? My other argument has been that the apotheosis of human intelligence is not AI, it's intuition. It's when, yes, we trip into that place where we realize that, there isn't a hierarchy, there is no one coming to save us. And yes, the greatest work we can be doing on the planet in this moment is self-knowledge. That is the greatest work we can be doing, because that is what's going to free us. That is what's going to make us look at the work of an Alison Hover or the work of a Cory Morningstar and close that chasm between what we know and believe and deeming it conspiracy theory or too far out or you're this or you're that or whatever else we've all heard. To say, you need to heed what's happening. This is at the far end. This is the factual, information that's coming from the far end. This is what is actually happening. What do we do to avert this? What do we do to stop this? I think that's what we have here in India, and we've had it for thousands of years, is self-knowledge. The highest pursuit we had here as the identity of an Indian, whatever that is, it's an idea of India, but it was always this embodiment. The purpose of being born was not to accumulate, was not to get rich, was not to get successful or famous or none of those things. It was self-knowledge. It was realization, the self-realization. So I find it interesting that Harvard has been in here on this last bastion, which is the Kumbh Mela, which is the biggest festival we have here, devoted to that very purpose, which is self-knowledge. That's why we go there. So Harvard has been here studying how we can have 30 million people come across 10 days to the Prayag. What is it that drives us? I'll be bowled over if they can manage to quantify that somehow and manage to put it into something that, I'll be bowled over if they manage to do that.
But that's also the point, which is very interesting, that the process with which a person has faith has been infiltrated with the rise of right-wing movements internationally. And because that has always been connected, religious movements have always been connected to internal lives. And then you see that, especially in India, where a lot of people are saying that the fundamentalism is on the rise. And then you understand why it's so easy for science to step in as the savior. That now faith systems are violent, so you need another belief system to replace that. And in the back of that, all of these kind of crazy delusional dreams of these people are being implemented and that's, I think, how the cultural movement is occurring. Anyway, that's
a good point.
Maybe Alison could talk a little bit. I can't hear you.
Oh,
Alison could talk a little bit about the because of everything coming, the artificial intelligence, the augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, it's all contingent on the 5G networks. And there's actually a lot of science and scientists, doctors speaking out against that, who have been speaking out, actually demanding of the European Union to halt that technology, which is being ignored. Anyway, because everything's contingent on that and it's so tied into military, maybe Alison would want to speak to that about 5G, because that's another area that really should be targeted.
Right. Well, there's an interesting book that I found really helpful in thinking about things. It's Manu Karuka's Empire's Tracks. And he also has a couple of talks online. Essentially, he was looking at the expansion of the Transcontinental Railroad and the intersection of Chinese labor and indigenous dispossession that was associated with that, and then the way in which the corporations advanced, in front of the state to have these networks of sort of domination and empire in the form of these transcontinental railroad systems. And I feel very much that what's been coming up over the past decade with the broadband, cloud-based internet systems is this next iteration of sort of colonial empire in the cloud. And that it's really vital that people understand it as a militarized infrastructure, because I think there are a lot of folks who sort of imagine, an agorist, like free association Bitcoin community, but really nobody really knows who Satoshi Nakamoto really is, and very likely has deep state connections, whatever that is. There isn't liberation in the cloud, I don't think. And so, the research, there's been a lot of research done that has a lot of concerns about 5G. Even if you were to set aside the health impacts, the reality is that the fourth industrial revolution and globalization 4.0, which is grounded on telepresence labor, automated labor, dispossession of people from many of their careers, including social care programs, healthcare providers, educators, caring for the elderly, caring for children. Those are all being turned over to algorithms and robots in ways that I don't think anyone, would want to have happen. So that's the 5G infrastructure. And I had a chance to drive across a good bit of the country. And I don't know, maybe Jason could confirm this for me because he's driven even more, but you pretty much on the US highways now, you're not outside the sight line of a 5G tower on the highway systems at this point. Like you pass one and then you see the next one on the horizon. And these have all just been popping up. These are not your old, the older cell towers that you would see that were like, tricked up like pine trees or something like that. These are whole new infrastructures that are being set up. And, we're not going to be able to go to the, clearly the UN or the EU because they're planning the Internet of Bodies and the Internet of Humans. And then 6G, the next iteration, which I was not aware of when I started this work, is essentially meant to enable robot-to-robot communication and digital twinning. So essentially full out artificial constructed worlds where we exist as data avatars, shadow selves in these virtual spaces, in fundamentally militarized spaces. So, for me, when I keep trying to think of like, what are the choke points to stop this system? One of them is to stop the imposition of a digital identity system, whether that's a blockchain, ID 2020, what have you, but the interoperable data systems, that is one. And then the other is the 5G networking or the 6G, is that data interoperability, which is tied up, I think as you pointed out in your last piece, Cory, with the satellite systems and the satellite constellation. So now, space has already been weaponized, our atmosphere has already been weaponized, but even more so with the thousands upon thousands of satellites that are going to essentially turn the world into a digital prison. But I will say, I do believe, wholeheartedly with what Deepti said. I'm not here to sort of throw in the towel and just say, oh, we should all just be depressed and this is a foregone conclusion. It is absolutely not. And I think we are incredibly powerful in our resistance. And it's interesting, I had a video that went up this week with an exchange that I had with Naomi Klein. And I said, as a powerful woman, I'm saying no to the fourth industrial revolution. This is not the path we want to take. And someone snidely said, I can't believe that she would say something like she was a strong person. It's very Trump. And I'm like, no, we actually need to know we are powerful. And I'm not saying that I individually am more powerful than other people. We are all powerful as human beings, as spirit-filled human beings in this world to fulfill whatever our responsibility is to the planet and future generations to as I often reference John Trudell, to put ourselves up against the machine of technologic, and some people say, well, if you don't have the whole plan, I don't want to hear from you. And I'm like, some of the plan is you walk the road and you listen and you look and you wait for the signs of what you're supposed to do next. And to me, this feels like a fulfillment in some small way of having us all in on this call, because I do feel like that the rich spiritual histories of cultural and land and communal and individual reflection and community power in India is very key. And I think maybe that's why, not so much I can't remember Deepti who said like that being dismissible, but perhaps you are the most formidable adversary. So if they go after you first and prevail, then the chips fall later. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's not that you're dismissible, it's that you are actually incredibly powerful, but awakening to that power. So I don't know if that
dispensable is the word I wanted to use. I want to tell you a quick story. I want to tell you guys a quick story about this festival we've just completed, the Navratri festival, which is 9 days of celebrating the goddess, the 9 avatars of the goddess, right? So at the end of that 9-day fasting and prayers, in the evening, I'd gone for a ceremony to a yoga shala close by, which is run by the Bihar School of Yoga pujaris, the pandits, the priests that we call them. And he finished the whole ceremony with the fire and the havan and came out feeling incredible. I was thinking of everybody that I know. And then I started talking to him about exactly this, about the lockdowns, what's happening, how it's going to go, how we'll open up and all of this. And he knew a lot about blockchain. In fact, he knew a lot that I was surprised about. And he said something very interesting at the end. He said, when I said, aren't you worried at what's happening to India? Aren't you worried that they're going to come in here and take over and they're going to destroy everything that we know and love and the forests and aren't you worried? And he said in this very typically, kind of, I call it the uncledom, in this kind of very casual way, he said, let them come, let them see what they can do. So what if Bill Gates puts a chip in the brain? What will he do? Isn't there something higher working with us with that? Let them come and see what they can do. They've been coming for so long. Let them come and see what they can do. And it was, hearing him say that after the prayers for me was so heartening. I was like, wow, okay, so somebody who is so deeply spiritually immersed, his daily practice is, yoga is exactly that, is self-knowledge. It was very casual for him. He was not concerned at all about it, that there I was saying, it's the end of the world and all of this stuff is happening and how are we going to save ourselves? And he was like, let them come. Let's see what can happen. Let's see what they do. So that was very heartening for me, going back on this, the human connections and what we can do. And yeah, perhaps it's not that we're so dispensable, but that, yeah, maybe we are formidable. Maybe we are far, all of us humans are far more formidable than we give ourselves credit for. By design, of course, it's been done to us, but maybe that's part of the process of reclamation as well, as just recovering ourselves, knowing that we're here on earth. It's God operating as us. That's what we are, no less than that. This I am God operating in the world as Deepti. You are God operating in the world as yourselves. This is all the work of God in creation, nothing less.
What do they say? Bring it.
Bring it. Bring it. The best one. Bring
Can
it.
I just there's then one just a couple of observations about this context of sovereign or self-autonomous beings. In the context of India, post-independence, there was a very big push for agrarian reform in the country, and a lot of attention was given to the idea that the Gandhian notion of village communities should be the basis of how the nation functions. Eventually, there were 5-year plans set up, which were not very helpful especially in a few states in the north and central India, of bringing up to speed and up to power the productivity and also taking care of the people who are looking after the land. A lot of the favor post-liberalization, which is as late as 1991, a lot of that focus shifts into object culture. And now, over the last decade or so, you see the rates of migration from agrarian rural settings where people have belonged, so to speak, to the earth in their kind of horrifying social hierarchies, but existing with the earth, are now homogenized into an industrial city idea. And because of the lack of care for the the productivity of land and the people that are doing it, a lot of people are forced to come to big metropolitan centers like Bombay and Delhi and become other kinds of labor. So they're now maybe taxi drivers, or they're delivery boys, or like 10,000 people come to Delhi, for example, every week for the first time. And you have, like, outside of the south, central south district, you have these communities of migrant workers that are continuously arriving for a better life. And what that better life is built on is the idea of consumption continuously. So they're, in a way, they're forced into an aspirational culture which they have absolutely no idea about. And they are themselves being disconnected from the root of of their own culture. Like, they belong, they're farmers, they're tribals, they've lived with the wildlife and the forests. But they're then, because they are neglected, whether, I mean, I tend to believe that it's a very deliberate choice to pile people into cities so that they can be easily controlled. But I mean, I think maybe Alison and Cory can speak a little more about that. But I've interviewed a lot of people who are migrants who've come to Delhi to find cheap work, because why do they come? The question is that, right? The life in the village is deplorable, and no matter how much NGOs or the government tries to look after it, it has not worked, because otherwise, all these people, their thoughts are, why would I come to a busy, crowded city so far away from such beautiful nature that we have at home? Why would I do that unless I was forced to, unless I had to? So I need to look after my children, I need to look after my family, so I need to go and make a living. And making a living on farming has been made impossible, almost. So that's what I mean, is that the filter is continuously reset by the technocrats in that sense, is that without their kind of administering the relationship of you and others, and of yours and nature, you have to subscribe to this model of constant consumption and being in crowded places, and you can't enjoy being one with nature. It's kind of a troubling thought that on one level, people who've grown up in the city do become the models that represent that aspirational culture, because I have access to a highly indulgent lifestyle. And for people who have come from poverty-stricken areas to Delhi and they interact with me, they want that life. And I've been told that much. So that's a very difficult conundrum to kind of untangle, because on one hand, you have this idea of faith and power, but on the other hand, you also have a system that destroys both things simultaneously.
Thank you. That reminds me of there's a documentary called The Diamond Empire, and it's all just kind of about kind of the fraud around the diamond industry. And then going back to Cecil Rhodes, who, first went to what they ended up calling Rhodesia, and then but they had these mines, and they were trying to get the local people, indigenous people, to work in the mines, and they're like not interested. Like, we're fine. We don't really want to work in mines. And they tell the story in the documentary about how they basically, established a government and implemented a tax system. And of course, the people needed to pay taxes within this currency that they didn't have access to. They don't have the power to create money. So it was a way to kind of inadvertently get, force people into working in the mines. And that story, I think, is really powerful in terms of we think about money as this natural thing, and we got to get our hands on money, and not seeing it as a construct that's not really there to facilitate trade, or the myth of barter, which is told in economics classes, which David Graeber, who passed away this year, did a really good job in his book Debt: The First 5,000 Years, dismantling that story, the myth of barter. I recommend everybody read that book. But I wanted to share a quote. There's another book that I really enjoyed reading, and I should get him on the show. His name is uh, Philip Goodchild. He wrote a book called Theology of Money. I just want to read a quick quote out of that book in terms of how this thing is such a controlling force in our life. And he writes, "Money is that which is of most social value. It is the precondition for the realization of all other ends. All other ends must be suspended until sufficient money is obtained for their realization. Money thus posits itself as the supreme being, the focus of attention and desire, the principle for for the realization of all capital projects. Money posits itself as God, the principle of all creation." And thinking about that, money is a fiction. It's fake, and I always kind of bring it back to, these core things like we talk about, like how do we redistribute money? How do we redistribute wealth? And we need to actually go deeper than that. We need to actually redefine what wealth is, because money is not wealth. And that story about, taking people off the land and pulling them into cities, um, to work to work for money. I think that we need to go deeper and think a little bit more harder about what it is we're actually working for. I don't know. I don't know.
No, I agree with you in the sense that it's not that it's money so much that people are seeking. I think it's more the fulfillment of desire. Money is just another channel to do that, right? So the introduction of a certain format of desire and what you should be desiring is it's like a lifelong game. You have to understand. I think that, and that's the intent of advertising or cinema or fictional narratives, is to place very specific desires within the mass public eye and consciousness, where you're able to then command what trends are manufactured and how people are spending their money. So in that sense, the individual's desire is actually the currency, right? Is that what do you desire? And then what are you going to do to get that fulfillment of that desire, then eventually kind of takes you down this road of making money and joining corporations and whatever. So the prescribed life versus the lived experience, I think somewhere in there, we have to see where our desires arise from. And, nobody knows what a smartphone is before it's introduced to a market or it's advertised. Nobody knows what that thing is. And so then you habituate publics to newer trends, which are then completely in control. So you're always looking at and always looking for the providers where you have not understood that, or as in individuals have not understood that the desire is unnatural in that sense. It's an artificial desire that has been placed, and then you spend enough time and money or work to earn the money so that you can fulfill that desire in some way.
Good point. Hey, so I wanted to say this. We initially talked about doing this for an hour and a half. We've gone over, but I'm wondering. We do have some questions, and I apologize to those who have asked some questions online. I would like to get to some of the questions. Are you guys all okay with sticking around for a little bit longer to try to get through some of these questions? Yeah. Okay.
I might have to. We're getting a firewood delivery, so if it shows up, I might have to pop off. But
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go through this, and we'll try to do these kind of quick because I want to get to everybody while we still have everyone. So I'm going to do a couple here from Michael Berger from YouTube. He's got a few of them here, but one of them is, are you ready to admit to yourself and others that this COVID pandemic is nothing more than a power grab by the global wealthy elites? That was the first question. And another question also by Michael. Do you realize that any digital currency can and will be erased or deleted if you upset or offend the powers that be? If they can delete your cash, but they want the power to do so. So there's two questions. One's about cash, and one is about, talking about the pandemic as being a power grab.
Well, I will just say, I'll just quickly say, I knew the first couple of days, like what was happening. I mean, I had never occurred to me that pandemic was going to be the trigger event, but I mean, as soon as like we got word at our office that we were going to have to close for a couple weeks, and then I was like, and everybody was talking in the same way, and it felt so bad, and I just knew, and it was really devastating both to have the situation with like, you know, knowing that there were, you know, I think realistically that there were deaths, you know, that happened as a result of mismanagement of this illness or targeted, you know, people need to understand our government has bioweapons programs that can be targeted at people. So, and to think that with so much money riding on this great reset that governments around the world would not utilize those technologies to make the situation happen, I think you're being pretty naive. And I think that's the same thing with folks who believe that as long as they behave according to what all the government says, that things will go back, shift that is wrapped in a public health framing. And then it's going to be ongoing. It's not, we're never going to get out of, we may get out of COVID, but we'll never get out of the biosecurity state until we demand it. And I agree in terms of the digital currency. I'm not 100% sure in terms of the specifics of the technology, but you know, I have a friend, Joseph, who knows a lot more about the blockchain systems and Bitcoin systems, but even if they don't erase it, they could make you not be able to actually utilize it for anything. They could blacklist you, make it such that you could not actually utilize those currency. And they can do it in real time now, because with drone surveillance and the sniffer drones, you know, you show up somewhere to express your rights, you know, as human beings, and that they'll just erase, you know, your ability to access whatever credits you need to try to survive. So I've been very clear on that from the beginning. I don't know if other folks want to add.
When I started writing about the coming financialization, assigning a monetary value to all life on the planet, I would write about that. And every time I would think, there's no way people will accept this, that the rich will now own what, you know, they have not yet destroyed what's left on the planet. And every time I just think, how will they ever get people to go along with this? And then when I started seeing campaigns come out, I mean, they would never actually, you know, like the New Deal for Nature, the Voice for the Planet, they don't actually tell you that they're monetizing nature. They just use beautiful holistic images of nature and children to market it. And then last September, the last couple of years was seeing the whole global economy teetering towards the edge of collapse. And I believe last year we were at the global debt, going back to money being fiction, the global debt, $253 trillion. And then how much money even is that? And then last fall, they started pumping trillions into the economy to keep it from collapsing. And so I knew that there had to be something coming around the corner. And I would think, but people won't accept another bailout after 2008. How will they do this without people absolutely revolting all over the world and their, you know, pensions being raided, the whole thing again? And so when this happened in March, like Alison, right away I said, this is how they're going to do it all, right? All their fourth industrial revolution technologies, all these things that when I looked at them before, I thought, well, you know, these are, I can't imagine humanity getting behind these things. They're not really going to come online. You know, they dream about this, but I doubt it will ever happen. Like, I just didn't see a way for that they would, you know, make all this happen. And so, yeah, COVID is the pretext for the reset, and they don't deny that. You know, and this is why millions of dollars are spent in scenario planning. If you go back, you look, there's all kinds of scenario planning that's gone into this, and they pay huge, and this is what it's for, right? Like, here it is. So I just wanted to comment on that.
So we'll go ahead and take another question. This is from a squirrel from YouTube. Hopefully not a real squirrel. Actually, that'd be kind of exciting if it were a real squirrel. But uh, I know
Yeah.
Allison is familiar with communitarianism. Are your other guests? So someone wanted to ask about communitarianism, and I'm not real familiar with the term communitarianism. I like community, but does anybody want to say anything about that? Or
I don't know that. I've never heard that term.
I mean, I will just chime in. I think there are a lot of different entities that are trying to put a frame on what is happening, right? And I think that's what's so challenging in the, when you think about what is the narrative arc, the framing is that, it's essentially it's embedded every social system, the privatization, such that things that seem like they would be good for the community are being fully financialized. And so there are people who are fighting for sort of individual freedoms who frame it all as socialism and communism. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that IBM and Exxon are not communist organizations, the US Chamber of Commerce. And you try to come back, with it. And then there's the technocracy, which is the industrial engineering, which definitely the blockchain and the 5G smart systems are an industrial engineered economy. I think the communitarianism, there's Amitai Etzioni, you can look him up. He's at, I believe, George Washington. So this has come out of late 20th century, 1980s onward, I think, but advancing again, this idea of caring social systems, but in not quite telling you that it's all going to be financialized and put you in a digital surveillance panopticon to mine your data for oil, as the new oil. So I think in many respects, technocracy has a lot of awareness. The communitarian aspect is probably not quite as much aware. I would say I don't necessarily find it super helpful. Like, I think it's important to know all of these histories. Who are all of these players? Is it Etzioni? Is it Zbigniew Brzezinski? Is it Henry Scott? The early technocracies. We need to know all of the pieces, but I think that there's a lot of jostling in here, just as like Facebook's jostling up against Google, up against Amazon Web Services. We understand the larger program is to capture all of humanity, life on the planet, including, and even non-living elements of the earth, into this larger machine of financialization. And I think that's the fundamental basis, is that it's a surveillance society with an overlay of financialization and gamification, gamified behavior management. That sounds really good to a lot of people. They're very, very clever how they've set this all up. And just as Cory was saying, she couldn't believe how they would get away with it. I think the thing that's been most devastating to me personally, as someone who, was coming from more of a left-leaning anarchist side, is the fact that like so few people who would otherwise question issues of empire and the government and the motivations have just been caught flat-footed on all of this, and 8 months in still have not gotten around to figuring out what's actually happening. It's really devastating to me. So,
like, care about our health. Big corporations wasting us, polluting our air. They care about our. No.
Cory, you're breaking up there, real quick.
All right, I'm just saying these are the very entities, the very corporations, the very governments that have destroyed our planet, that have polluted our water, poisoned our air, poisoned our environment, GMO foods, I mean, everything. So to now believe that all of a sudden these same entities care about our health, it's really actually insane. I mean, how do you come to that conclusion? And if you look at the all the invasions on sovereign states, whether it's Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, all over the world, they lie. These governments lie. I mean, they own the media. They control all the media. They bought it. They own it. They bought it, right? So again, like, I think there's a lot of willful blindness going on here, because maybe it's frightening to realize that we are on our own and that we have to unite again against, our oppressors. This is class war. I think people are really clinging on to, the privileges that obtained so far through the oppression of our brothers and sisters. And I think, I think there's a lot people just don't want to accept. They don't want to see it. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree to that because, I mean, the guilt that comes with understanding what our interaction with society in general is built on is not an easy. It's not an easy thing to accept for ourselves. I think. I mean, it's just it's. Well, I mean, I've been witness to some of the mining processes, and I've interviewed some people, not just in India but also West Africa, and the aggressive, violent nature of how industrialization actually functions in these places is just astounding. Because, I mean, take Freetown, for example, capital of Sierra Leone, that when you're approaching, you have to take a ferry. So when you're approaching, the only thing that you see on the coast is just oil rigs, right? And then you get off the boat and into the city, there's no electricity. The people are all on the streets because most of them are unemployed, and it's just a. And then you have the other side of the valley, which is basically all the people who've been hired by the oil companies and the diamond mines, who are living a absolutely ultra luxurious life in the same spot. So to be able to see that once, I mean, I think most of us have not had the direct experience of how horrifying these places actually are. So it's very difficult for people, especially who are caught up in the dream, so to speak, to actually realize individually that the situation is very dire. It's not just some handful of people on the internet who are talking about it. The situation is very dire, and our habits are. And I mean, the willfulness of knowing about the world, one thing, and the second, to manage our own desires in our own lives. Those are the two things that I think are worth a thought.
I wanted to chime in on something on that. Like, I've been attacked for talking about some of this stuff, and one of the things that's been thrown at me is this is my white privilege that I'm not freaking out as much about COVID, but I'm talking about these other things. And like I'm coming from a place of like looking at the whole world and looking at the wars that US commits and looking at the devastation that economic policies put on people, and people are so stuck in the elections right here between Biden and Trump, and I'm like, Biden and Trump are both evil. Sorry, they're both evil. And then I'm attacked for being this is my white privilege that I can, somehow I'm sitting on a pedestal, I don't know. That came to mind. It's kind of disheartening for someone. I spent my whole life speaking up about human rights and environmental issues. Not that I live my own values. I could go on and on about the flaws, my own personal flaws, but it's just really interesting to be attacked from that angle, particularly from people that are supposedly on the left, that are supposed to care about human rights and supposed to care about ecology, that are actually following people like Biden and following the Democratic Party and following these nonprofits and following people like Bill Gates and the people that are actually your enemy. You're actually following your enemy. So I don't know. We live in a mad world. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I mean, it's also in the sense that, I mean, it's like I was saying earlier, is that we have never been used to making social decisions in that sense, because there's always an external authority that has the power to do that for us. And to be able to think that my action, as even as a privileged person who's living in a developing country, my action has a lot of consequence. Like every single, like this is the silent. Well, that's what I mean. It's like this, the political theater aside, my silent habits of the everyday are what is running the industrial paradigm every single day. So before I wake up, the coffee is already in my jar, but that has taken millions of people to make that possible. And that understanding, I think, is kind of that's gone missing. I think that's gone missing. And to bring that back, which is need the politician or the religious institution or the technocrats to make a decision for me. I need to see what the world is and what my position in that world is. How do I locate myself within all of this without the intellectualism in that sense, right? Like there's no political intellectualism involved in everyday living. We all do the same thing. So like the left leaning or the central or the liberal or the right leaning, all of those guys, all of these people, all of us are buying the same objects, and those objects are at the center of how mining occurs and how transportation occurs. And of course, you need the petroleum industry. So, I mean, that's a huge chain of events that's continuously unfolding. But we're continuously kind of glued to these television screens thinking that the politicians are going to solve our problems. They're not. They're not at all. We are. We're going to do that.
So let's take another question here.
Kamala Harris.
What?
She's going to save everyone.
Oh.
Kamala Harris, come on.
Oh, Kamala. I forgot. Never mind. Let's just end this transmission right now. We're all good. So let's see. Someone, Liam314 asked, this question is for Cory. Why is the 1%? Why does the 1% want to accelerate the collapse of civilization with the fourth industrial revolution? So there's an assumption that there in that question that they want to collapse the civilization with the fourth industrial revolution.
I'd say it's a contraction of the economy. It's just further privatization. It's like right now they're actually crushing the informal economies in the global south. They don't care if people starve to death. I mean, they're looking at, right now there's a huge amount of people reaching, becoming older. And even that's becoming a huge problem. I mean, if you look at World Bank reports, how will these pensions support all these people older? I mean, populations are declining in the G20 states, and the two countries with the population will be Africa and Asia, right? India. So that's why there's such focus on those countries. I mean, I don't think they see it as their ideologies are depraved. I would say that they're psychopaths. I mean, they don't care. They use biodiversity and climate change as a guise to do all these things, but they actually, if you look at what they're doing, they don't care about biodiversity. They don't care about climate. If you look at videos and papers on the fourth industrial revolution, there's no mention of forests or trees or anything in it. It's all about technology and control of people, surveillance and that, and just there's this, it's like technology is like a god. So they have no connection at all with nature. In their minds, technology is superior to nature and can replace nature. I mean, so they don't see it as collapse of civilization or collapse of ecosystems or anything. I think they truly believe that they will replace nature with technology. Even the mining the oceans, I think, covers 10 of the 17 sustainable development goals. Like, how does destroying the ocean play into sustainable development? I mean, that's crazy, right? I don't even know if that answers her question at all, but.
Can I just chime in too on the impact economy? Jason, just because that's the other piece, is that essentially with the shift to automation, including middle-class jobs, white-collar jobs, knowledge work, social care becoming platformed and automated, people are redundant. And as Cory said, they're probably anticipating that there will be a certain numbers of people killed off. I think this shift to telemedicine is going to kill people off, the people that they don't want to pay off their pensions. But then the people who are left are going to be data mined within this social impact economy with pay for success and social impact bonds, which is really what my research focus has been. But in order for that to happen, people need to essentially become wards of the state, the corporate state, and to not be able to make a living independent of this technocratic system. And so you will be awarded, whatever credits that you need for housing or healthcare or food, but it's all conditional and it's all monitored within the panopticon. So they need to make sure that no one can be independent of this system, or that the masses must be dependent on this new digital wallet system to harness them into the impact economy, which is the next hedge fund market. And you'll see a lot of discussion coming online now about reskilling. So all of the people who've been pushed out of work because of the lockdowns, they will now be reskilled to build both the digital jail to code augmented reality, and also to build biotech and nanotech programs that will essentially move us into becoming cyborgs, connected with a mechanistic energy systems and separate from nature, to be completely separate. So those are two of the key reskilling sectors, is both the coding and the pharma healthcare systems. And none of it's good. But it is a political economy decision to crash the independent small businesses and to push everything into these new workforce development plans that will be set up as commodities markets. Because there's actually an entity called income sharing agreements, ISAs, where you agree to they'll garnish your wages to pay back your training costs and also your wraparound service costs in New Jersey. The governor of New Jersey is advancing this. But the same people who crashed the global economy last time, who created collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, on housing, the same guy, Christopher Riccardelli, is behind the securitization of income sharing agreements as well. So it really is about setting up a literal game where you're betting on people's lives and increasingly betting against them.
So we've got another question from Laura Ross Garcia from Facebook. She says, I'm wondering about the energy sector. What of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and the UN, the systems that they are building or planning to run for the tech piece will require lots of energy, electricity, and also data storage. We know about Microsoft's experiment about storing data in the structures in the ocean. And I know Cory and I have talked a little bit about this from our last interview, and I know she writes about this in our article. But does anybody want to chime in on that question about energy, power, storage, and energy use?
I can just say that nuclear is going to be huge. Carbon capture storage is going to be huge. They have everyone hypnotized and mesmerized by this idea of wind turbines and solar, which they put that at the front and center because they've sold that image to the liberal class as progressive and clean, which it isn't. But regardless, it's politically correct and accepted. And so, yeah, nuclear, carbon capture storage, carbon offsets, more of the same. Carbon neutral has nothing to do with zero carbon. It's just more of the same. The systems going forward, the whole, again, guys are protecting the climate and biodiversity, this whole system, the Great Reset going forward, it is going to be massively dependent on huge amounts of energy. I mean, that's the next section in my series right now. I think it's going to blow people's minds how much energy it takes to run the system in the data centers. It's mind-blowing. Like basically all the energy that's been created in the past 10 years, the so-called green energy, which it isn't, but regardless, that energy is all being consumed by and consumed by data centers. So we're creating energy just to be eaten, just to another part of an industrial machine. So, and that is only set to grow and just massively. So what's coming is an actual nightmare compared to now. It's going to be even worse. It's hard to imagine, but yeah.
Okay, and then we have a question from Jessica Stewart Treglia from Facebook. This question is either for Deepti or Varun. In regards to no one coming to save us, tech would like to be seen as a savior. Its intent is to destroy self-knowledge and internal dialogue. Google is spending billions to reset the education system in Maharashtra. Hopefully I said that correctly. Maharashtra. Curious if there is any pushback as to, as it will all be guaranteed an unprecedented shift of cultural values and beliefs, especially in terms of spiritual values. So, Varun or Deepti, would either of you like to chime in on that one?
Um, Only to say, if I can platform somebody brilliant to Jason, we talked about this for a minute this morning, but Manish Jain with his Shikshantar education hacking facility speaks a lot to our ideas of education. And yes, the tech job, Google and Facebook, all of them have been here pushing around education. This year we had, I don't know when it was, sometime during the lockdowns, that we had a new education plan that was delivered, a new government the education plan 2020 that came in here as well. And yeah, just like Cory and Alison just spoke to, yeah, what's coming with the technocracy is what has come, what's being implemented is so huge. It's going to need so much. And yes, very much education is part of that agenda, is to reorient, re-engineer, socially engineer us into all the levels and phases that are going to be required for humanity to move from reality to technology, to be put on the blockchain, to exist on the blockchain. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but just to reiterate, it is not a foregone conclusion. It's not a foregone conclusion. I still have reason to believe this is perhaps it gets bifurcated. Perhaps that's one way the outcome comes, because that's what we're seeing all around us now as well, is the people who are completely wholly bought into this, given into this, and going that route and actually believe it's good and that's how we should evolve. Including Elon Musk, who said about Bolivia, we'll coup whoever we want, because they wanted the lithium. Yeah, resources. That's what's going to start happening, is that the massive requirement for resources for natural resources. And then there will be this, maybe the rest of us, the other side. I've seen a lot of artwork like this also, where it shows a bifurcated world, one which is green and organic and grows its own food and has people living in really, balanced health and happiness, and the other that has this very dark dystopian vision that is being installed in us, not just in reality, but also in our very psyche. The idea of accepting this as the outcome, this very dystopian outcome that's run on technocracy, for which there's been umpteen years of predictive programming with films like The Matrix and whatever else we've been seeing. I still have a lot of faith in us. I still have a lot of faith in the human mind, in the human spirit, in who we are and where we can go. I still have a lot of faith in it. I still have a lot of faith in us. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Just wanted to throw in that the globe, sorry, Jason, I just wanted to throw in that I think it's called the Global Education Fund. Alison, you might know, it was set up in conjunction under the umbrella of the United Nations by Facebook, Google, MasterCard. It was launched about 15 days after the pandemic was announced. which I think was March 11th or 13th of this year. So anyway, that's people should go and check that out, because that was already created and ready to go again in March. And that's basically bringing all education in the world under one umbrella.
So,
That's it. That's all I want
oh
to
yeah,
say
yeah.
about
Sorry,
it.
I was stuck on a wrong screen. I was trying to jump back to it as quick as possible there. So what I'll do here is, I know you guys have given us a lot of your time, and thank you so much. We have a bunch more questions. There's no way we're going to get through them all, but what I'm going to do is, if you guys are good, I'll just read through them real quick, and then any of them that you want to answer that connect with you, you can just chime in, and then we'll just kind of finish it out that way. Again, if we don't answer everyone's question, I do apologize. There's a lot of questions. But I'm just going to really quickly just read through some of the things that were asked here, and then I'll let you guys kind of just go off from there, and then we'll finish it up. Thank you so much. So we had so one person said, "How are we going to defend against the reappropriation of private property, land, by force of the Agenda 21 state pirates?" That was one person. Another person asked, how do we disarm the 5G space grid? And actually, I know that there has been some sabotage against some of the 5G towers. I'm not going to make any comment about that, but uh, Jake Bob asked a question: how do corporations and hedge funds plan to make money on poor people? And I know Allison's talked a lot about this. So if you're curious, go to my Argus Fest. There's lots of interviews with Allison. She gives to a lot of detail about this. What is the mechanism they have in mind about making money off of poor people? Again, that's a very long answer, and Allison has tons of stuff on that. But if you want to say something about that, Owlmere asked a question for the speakers in respect to spirit and law. If there's any recourse to power of common law as a channel of resistance in respect to sovereignty, i.e., being in a free living spirit. I think the challenge of that is actually you're still appealing to the law. But anyway, so that's a idea out there. Porgy Amor has a question regarding China as a surveillance state and asked, can Cory talk a little bit about Jack Ma and the super rich in Asia and what is their end game? Clifford Gomes said, COVID is the pretext, yes, but why now? Did they always intend to do it as soon as they had some kind of critical mass of infrastructure in place? I don't think so. I think they know that a violent environmental change is on the horizon and they keep pushing hard to get the measure of inventory and control in place to capture as much of humanity in their system before it happens. There's a huge disruption coming in nature. I think they're running hard to gain control before it pops. This is a long question. Most of it's common, but the methane clathrates, am I saying that right? Hopefully, are going to release a nasty burp. Anywhere from 20 to 100 gigatons. Life is going to be disrupted. So that was a long question. Joseph, you know what? I lost that question. I apologize. And then one last one is a question for Deepti. Could she talk about her acquaintance with Troy Southgate of the National Anarchist Movement? So, oh, that was from Joseph. So I don't know. I'm just gonna throw all that stuff out there and let you guys just kind of answer whatever you want to answer. And yeah, so feel free to just chime in wherever you want. Anyone? That was a lot.
A lot. Um,
I would say, I just will say really quick, Allison, that laws are created to protect the rich. And I think there's a lot of people know exactly what has to be done, and it's things that we can't discuss on this medium. And people have to organize in their communities and with each other off of line, face to face. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyone else want to chime
Yeah.
in or last?
I mean, I will just say that on the sort of defense of land, I come at this from a lens that's different from a lot of folks in that, like, I really do believe that, being here in the U.S., that we're in the belly of the beast of empire that doesn't want to acknowledge that it is an empire. And it's a nation that was built fundamentally on land theft, and genocide and theft of bodies from people from Africa and their labor and their children. And my frame is always that we are now living through the consequences of never having acknowledged or tried to remedy that situation. So when we talk about property, I think I always understand it within this larger historic context, and not simply in an identity politics sort of way, because I realize that no individual communities are monolithic, right? And many, it's complex, and there's a lot of trauma in those communities as well. But one of the things that I found most inspiring to me before COVID, like the month before, were the Wet'suwet'en Nation and standing up about the pipeline companies. And again, what Cory was saying about the sustainability and the reframing of different sort of oil assets, that the LNG is supposedly like better for the environment, right? Somehow than regular, other petroleum products. And so that's why we're going to, cut through indigenous lands and contaminate their waters because for environmental reasons. And that those women who were standing in that up against the state on their unceded lands were there in ceremony, right? And they were there on their lands. And so for me, I'm trying to navigate what it looks like to be someone who isn't really entitled, to particular lands, knowing that at this point in the time, I am not seeing organized resistance from the communities. And it's great to hear that in India that's happening, and that's awesome. I'm at a distance. It's hard for me to know how to plug in, but I always want to understand it in that way. As far as the 5G, a lot of it is narrative. I think we need to understand, I think if we understood it as as a domestic military occupation, if somehow we could reconstitute a global peace movement, and I have lots of people to say, oh, Alison, it's never going to be, you're not going to unite across the globe. But for me, I would stand with the mothers of Brazil and China and South Africa and India against these technologies that want to essentially turn our future generations into synthetic biology zombie machines, for data commodities. That's horror. So if we can get control of a different narrative and build consensus around that, I think a lot of it is in your mental space, is understanding what 5G really is. I have talked a lot about pay for success finance. I would recommend, my blog is Wrench in the Gears. If you look up, there's a piece called around George Soros and the Institute for New Economic Thinking. That is a big piece of it. And then there's also a small part about pay for success finance. So if you Google those things on my blog. And as far as China and the surveillance state, I think there's there's a lot of complexity around China, right? And in my sense from my research is that in many ways, the US has been embedded in China, since Nixon is this backdoor and is trying out a lot of these industrial engineered social opportunities within China. And that now we have these billionaires. I think probably we would be hard pressed to think that Jack Ma is out for the people of China. He is working, at the same level as Bezos and UBS Bank and Goldman Sachs. He is in that group. So what's really vital is to understand how in China, they are very advanced in artificial intelligence and facial recognition. They're ahead of Silicon Valley in that. And what's happening now is that they are melding innovative finance out of the Bay Area, out of New York hedge funds, out of the Swiss banking systems with sophisticated technologies out of China and also out of India, right? And so it's the billionaires who are uniting. And Tencent, which is based in China, it's one of the most powerful corporate entities, is very deeply into the video gaming space and into facial recognition payments and into credit scoring. It's a corporate entity. It's not there for the benefit of the people. Tencent is not investing in video games for the Chinese people. It's investing in it because that capitalism has jumped into the virtual realm, and with it, we need to understand the relations between Beijing, their educational models, the Bay Area, and the finance. Because if you look at it from a class warfare level, the billionaires of China are not in it for the poor and, middle class folks. They're just as much into the reset as everyone else. So I guess that's pretty much what I have to say on that.
Hiroyuki Hamada just didn't, his last piece that he wrote touched on the aspect of what's happening in China. So I would just suggest that people go read that, because I thought it was really well done, what he wrote about it.
Say that again. Who is it?
Hiroyuki Hamada. I think it's published on Off Guardian and where
Right,
else?
right.
I don't know where else. People just put in his name. I think it's
I'll
called.
put it on the screen here in a minute.
Yeah, thank you. Killing. Sorry, I can't think of it right now. Something killing. The Killing. It was just in the past month.
So if I may say, going back on what Cory spoke to, the previous statement that you've made, and what Alison just spoke to as well, there's been this a predatory colonialism that's kind of infected the world way before COVID did.
Yeah.
Cory speaking about, they make laws for the billionaires, right? If they make laws for the rich people, they make laws for the billionaires. The history is always written by the winners. And yet, if you look at like what happened at Standing Rock, what's happening here at Mai Molem in Goa, when you have indigenous people around the world, no matter where it is, when resistance comes up from the indigenous people of the earth, that is a very organic process. It's not something that's done like in a campaign corporate way that we think of, organized resistance as such. I think it's a very organic process. You're looking to protect your mother. This is the mother. We live on the mother body. And indigenous resistant people who have this colonial mentality coming over them, as we have in India for hundreds of years that we came out of. It's this predatory colonialism that's the problem, and it's the question I keep asking everywhere: who sits at the apex? Who is running the script? Where did this come from? Who is running the script? Because as I've been doing this entire time, from when I realized what was going on, as Alison spoke to, when I realized what was going on and what was actually, what COVID-19 was actually all about, as a guise to bring in the technocracy, the place I kept going back to, the only place where I found comfort, where it made sense, was the framing of indigenous cultures and mythologies around the world, including my own here in India. Because every single indigenous culture anywhere around the world speaks to these times. Everywhere we have mythologies that go back thousands of years that speak to these times, these end times that will come, how this collapse will happen. I mean, not specific to technocracy, but the assumption to play God, the assumption to play God. And quickly to say, I don't know, there was this question about what was about anarchists. Yeah, I have been looking very much into anarchy across the world and what the movements are like. Troy or Tori Southgate. There's also Johan Tengra here in India, who's been, just to give him a shout out, who's been doing some amazing work getting information out to people. He was one of the first mass protests. He organizes campaigns to get people together in the cities and push back against what's being brought in. It dispenses information. So Yeah, I have been, and Jeff Berwick, another anarcho-capitalist, but I look into the anarchists everywhere because I think they're the closest to they're the closest to having the solution. Yeah, anarchy, pretty much.
And I found here's the website for Hiroki. What was the what Corey? What was the name of the article? It's on Off Guardian. You said.
Off Guardian, I think it's called The Killing.
Okay, I was just going to try to find that. If everyone's familiar, off-guardian.org has a lot of great news articles.
Yeah, you might get, because we're all being censored now, so you might get a message saying that it's not safe, but you can just ignore the message and go to the site.
Speaking of which,
The
I mean,
truth.
it's interesting too because all these Israeli companies that were behind security, internet security and website security, and I've noticed that many years ago that certain sites would have all these warnings, and I always felt like I think this warning is here for political reasons, not security reasons. I'm not able to find it. If you want to send me the link, I can
And
put it on the screen.
Guardian, you're on
I'm
Hiroyuki's.
That's who.
I'm well.
I
I'm
think
on.
that's his personal art
Oh
page
no,
website.
I know that. I'm looking over here
Okay.
on Off Guardian as well. So here I'll show you.
Oh, okay.
Adding to that, adding on to the indigenous and the biodiversity aspect, and just whole earth aspect. Indigenous peoples presently represent about 5% of the Earth's population, of the human population, and protect 80% of what's left of the planet's biodiversity. And yet, WWF, World Economic Forum, and all want to displace them. You know, the genocide continues of indigenous people, want to displace them through this New Deal for Nature, and basically enclose these lands to privatize and commodify. And so, you know, again, those very people that protect, that show us and live that, how to protect nature, they're being further displaced. WWF, if you go to Survival International, they have, it's a great site. Stephen Cory's been doing great work with people in Africa, just basically crimes, torture, murder, rape of indigenous peoples, and yet people are sending them money. You know, it's just, it's unbelievable. It's sickening, you know, and these are the people telling us that they've got our back. I mean, it's all advertising, promotion, you know, fed with so much what Varun was saying, like celebrity fetish plays a huge part in this, and just the entertainment industry. Everybody's, these cultures, especially the West, we're depleted, we're empty, we have no culture, and so we're looking to fulfill desires by things that will, you know, they will never fulfill us. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but the WWF, I mean, the marketing aspect, the storytelling, the social engineering, the behavioral change elements, the language, it's all so very powerful, you know, and it's just leading us, um, you know, straight to our demise, to our own demise.
So those of you watching, you can actually
I'll
read
just
Corey's work over here at her blog is The Art of Annihilation. And the challenge is you can't share it. YouTube doesn't let you share her blog. But she also writes on, a lot of people have been finding tricky ways to try to get that shared. But she also writes on The Wrong Kind of Green as well. So I encourage you to look out her work. Also, Allison's blog is wrenchinthegears.org. Is it .org? I should know this.
Yeah.
Allison.
Or
Yeah,
com,
okay.
I think.
.com, sorry. So that's Allison's blog. Varun, did you wanna say something from all those? There's a lot of
I just
questions
wanted
there.
to no, I just wanted to add on to what Cory just said. Which see, I mean, I think there are two aspects to untangling this. One is first of all, you really need to know what is happening. And second, then the conversion of that information into your own circles. Because the hardest thing that I've struggled with actually is to convince people that there is something very wrong with how society is functioning right now. And that there are some very specific people who've managed to make it so that we don't even realize it. And so that, I think we need to kind of get back all of this knowledge that these three women have done, which is incredible. And that has to go more to more people, and more people need to know about all of that stuff that's actually happening, and how it's happening. The mechanics of that are very important to know. And that's something that I've struggled with, is that people are not convinced that there is actually malevolent, psychopathic, narcissistic individuals who are actually calling the shots. And then, once you realize this, then you can kind of sort of come to points of where you can counter it, and how you counter it, and how do you kind of organize and reorganize society, which is beneficial to itself rather than just some insane plans of creating singularities and things like this. And that's one thing. And the second thing that I'd like to just mention very quickly is two instances. One is called the Chipko movement in India in the 70s, which is a very interesting event that occurred, where women were hugging trees so that they were not felled. And the second is the community of the Bishnois, the people of the 20 schools that live in Rajasthan, and the tenets that they live by with nature. So these are two things that people are welcome to look at, because there's some very inspiring templates on how we can move from this absolutely destructive format of living into equitable living in some ways. That's it.
Could you maybe put, when this is over, you could drop a link in the comments, Varun? Because that would be awesome.
Yeah, and for those of you who didn't get your question answered, it's possible maybe some of the speakers could come on to the, they might make some comments on it. Cory, go ahead. Or Cory, was that you?
I reference those two. Yeah, I actually referenced those two movements that Varun just mentioned in the last, I think it's segment 6 of the Standing Rock series on the art of annihilation in the Wrong Kind of Green website. Yeah, those two movements that he just mentioned.
Oh.
I actually reference them in basically to juxtapose those movements against what we have right now, the quote unquote movements in the global north that are financed and largely managed and created by the foundations driving forward the ruling class narratives and initiatives. So that's on, the Art of Annihilation. It's the Standing Rock series, I think from 2000 and I don't know. Way I can send you the link if people are interested, just to compare that very real thing, that very real movement, and it's comparing to what we see today. And I think it's really powerful to see those side by side, because you step back and you go, oh my God, what has happened? How did this happen? Like I really think what Varun is speaking about is so important, understanding how we're being engineered to actually we're being weapons against ourselves through social engineering and behavioral change. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And I did find this is the article, Killing Unknown. It's on Off Guardian from earlier. Any final words from everyone there? Does anybody want to take us out with some thoughts? Final thoughts?
I'm just so glad this happened. I really think all of all the collaborators here for spending your Sunday with us. And like I feel like in some ways is hard is to do this in these digital spaces. Like we have to have a framework. And I think there's a lot of healing that's involved. Like I think we need to interrogate ourselves, but we also need to have a way out. You know what I mean? And I think looking at models of how other work that has been done, that we like, there's both the guilt, but if there's guilt without mobilizing into anything else, like if we're just feel really bad, but then we don't do anything, like then that isn't effective. So we have to be able to find ways to connect locally with our local people and acknowledge the harms, and then start walking the road out of it. You know what I mean? In ways that are not fake, that are not contrived, that are not manufactured and captured into the data surveillance situation. So, but I feel like we're in this large psyop, right? Like this larger engineered, it's like a spectacle. Like we're living in this crazy spectacle of run by sociopathic people, and the longer we're in it, the people become complicit in it. And so to get out of it, you actually have to acknowledge that you were complicit in it, which is really hard. So people would just rather keep going than to actually like stop and start to back out. And so like the idea of people who have worked in entertainment spaces or media spaces or communication spaces, it's like, how do we present an alternative framing that can help us start to get back out of it? I guess that's how I'm trying to sort of, people ask what the answer is, and I don't think you could just flip the switch and make the answer, but we need a framework to both, once we know what the thing is to start walking towards the next thing. I don't know if I'm articulating myself well, but I think that feels like the next bit. Both own our responsibility in it, but then to not just be like, I'm terrible, I should just like go to, put my head under the covers and never come out, to actually become empowered to do something.
Yeah. And also, I mean, in that sense, like it's very like that chain of thought takes you to the idea of imagination, and that the paradigm within which we imagine our life itself is so highly imperialized that a lot of people don't even see an option of how different life could be, and how it. I mean, so that, I mean, in that sense, like I think we've spoken briefly about this before, Alison, is that the power of imagination of the collective, and how that can facilitate a switch in the gear here, and change this kind of destructive, economical, isolating, insulating format that we are now facing.
I think that we have to be very, very mindful of children right now and youth. Like I'm really, really worried about children and youth. I have a 5-year-old grandson, and he started school and he didn't wear a mask, and he was the only one in his class, and the teacher took him aside and convinced him to wear a mask. And of course, if you're a child, you want to wear, you want to be like everybody else and accepted by your peers. I mean, that's the power of conformity, especially at the young age. Anyway, we were talking about this, and I asked him what he learned that first day, and he told me the first thing he said, he looked at me and he said, "No touching, no touching." That worries me. If I was, I mean, they're being born into this depraved type of culture, living and breathing technology, completely disconnected from the natural world. I think people, feed your child real food, hug them, love them, take them outside, go for walks with them, let them know that it breaks my heart when I see children trying to get their parents' attention, and the parents are looking at that screen and they can't look, and those children grow up believing and thinking they're secondary, that they come second, that they're not. It's hard for me to even talk about. I find it really, really upsetting. I'm really fearful for our children.
Well, on that,
I don't
go
think
ahead.
we're advocating strongly enough for children and youth. And I'm
And,
disappointed that the team is advocating.
and it's interesting how a lot of this is framed as, protecting children, and all of these things that are happening are framed. And I've even had it just today. I had somebody like, do you have kids? Like, I'm like, I don't. I care about kids. I'm actually, talking about this because I do care about kids in the future. But it's framed as they've captured that narrative around, protecting the children.
Well, the whole entire youth narrative has been co-opted with the kid from Sweden, right? Um, apparently leading the whole way. Yeah. But I really agree with Cory what she said there, because I think a lot of us, at least a lot of the women that I know around this, came to the awakening, came to prescience around what was happening with education, what was happening with rules, what was happening to their futures. This is how a lot of us came to it. I know that's the case with Alison. I know a lot of the women who came to this, Jason, the people that the women that you've been interviewing, and there's something very powerful to say for that connection between mother and children, even with the Chipko movement that you've both spoken about, Varun and Cory. It was women. It was the women of the village. Standing Rock was begun when a group of women got together and began ceremony and began singing. My Mola here is a group of women, and especially in the context of India. Just I want to say this before I wind it up. Before we wind it up, that especially in India, it's so important. The way we treat the women is the way we treat the earth, is the way we treat the women, is the way we treat the earth. So this consciousness really does need to come into it needs to be prioritized. It needs to be prioritized. I'm not going to get into what all has been happening around with women in India, including the most recent case in the north. But yeah, protect the women and children. Protect the women and children.
It's interesting. I've had a lot of people thank me, like, thank you for telling all these women's stories, and I was like, well, I wasn't really intentionally going out to just like find women's stories. It just happened to be they're the ones that were talking about this stuff, and I think it was that mothers are more connected to understand these things than than men, or even women that aren't mothers. There's something about being a mother maybe that is getting people to understand what's happening. But I'm really grateful for all the amazing women that I've met, and men as well. And I'm going to continue doing this. And I want to thank you guys for joining us.